will read to us and we'll have it, but I'll give a little introduction. First of all, we're talking here about a king had a dream. He was an idol worshiper. He was sacrificing. He really had a true desire to serve God, but he was doing what he knew to do, which is sacrificing, like the way he was doing when he was an idol worshiper, or in whatever service was in his time, how you serve the gods. But he really had a true desire to serve God. This is in Kuzari, story that happened 1,400 years ago. And then 400 years later, after that story, came along Rabbi Levi, and liked the idea, took the story and made it into a discussion of a king and a rabbi talking. So that way it's more interesting. So the discussion in the book is not between the king and the rabbi, but we have to put our mindset in that way. Poetic license to use the story that really happened 400 years before the Rabbi Levi, who lived in the time of the Rambam. The Rambam did outreach, dealing with the Jews that were gone into deep philosophy, and he went and did what we call symposiums. The Rambam would sit with the greatest philosophers and go at it head on head, and of course would always win. But Rabbi Levi did inreach. You want to know what you're all about? You want to know what you're being a Jew about? So this book came along in the darkest part of the Jewish history. 1,000 years into exile, we have another 1,000 years ahead. This is like in the crunch, in the depths of the exile, and suddenly we take our head out of the water and we start to breathe air of redemption, air of you are a nation, and kings are coming to you and asking you, how do I run my nation? And who is this nation, this king that's running the nation? Why is he concerned in serving God? He should be concerned in finance and security. That's it. No, but we as a Jewish people, it's us who we are. We are light unto the nations. We have other interests besides. We have other missions. Avraham Avinu was chosen to be a light unto the nations. All the nations will be blessed from you. Whoever, right? So this is who we are. And suddenly in the 1,000 years to exile, we're scattered to the four corners of the world. This book comes and says, remember who you are. Remember your mission. You're not a nation right now. You're not all together. You're not a nation in one place. You're going through. It's like you have a machine's not working. So you dismantle the pieces and you clean each one. We went out to the four corners of the world to cleanse ourselves and prepare ourselves for our mission. And here we are back 2,000 years, 1,000 years later with 2,000 years of exile. We're back. And the questions and discussions that are in this book are 100% relevant to the discussions and the questions and the difficulties that we're dealing with today in our spiritual world. This is not a book of something that happened in the past and questions that are not clear. These are things that we are still dealing with, these questions, and need to be clarified. So just to make it clear from the original story, or from the way the book is written, after the first chapter, the king converts. And then the rest of the book, the other four, there's 5 chapters. The rest of the chapters are a Jew talking to a Jew. But the first chapter is a Jew, the message that we have to the world, the Jew talking to the king. And we're in a discussion. The king was shocked when he heard about Moshe Rabbeinu and how Moshe Rabbeinu told us the past, the future, besides all the wondrous things that Moshe Rabbeinu did, going above nature, walking into fire, not eating, not drinking, 40 days, 40 nights, and all the miracles about Moshe Rabbeinu. But he also says he told us the past and he told us the future, and he told us how the world was created. And the king is like, wow, I got to hear more about that. Tell me, you have a calculation of when the world is created? And he says, yes. Not only we have a calculation, there is no argument of all the Jewish people from one corner of the world to the other. Nobody disagrees on this fact that the world is 5,785 years old, and in the time when this happened, the story happened, was 4,500 years old, and there's no disagreement. And us Jews like to disagree about everything, but we don't. There's no disagreement that the world, and we'll get there in a minute, but that the time that Adam Arishon, the first human being that we know of that is moral, that is godly, that is a tzaddik, that is that is holy, that communicates with God. That's the first person we count from. That's when there's a person that has freedom of choice, that has thought, that has speech, that has. That's all we know about. Okay, there were prehistoric people before Adam Arishon. There's no problem to believe that. There's midrashim that talk about that. There were people, so they were what we call a human animal. But the human godly person, the new level of creation, we spoke about the four levels of creation: stone, plant, animal, human. The next level, the switch between animal and human, that happened 5,785 years ago. And this brings to the question, well, what about the nations that say that the world is billions of years old? So the first discussion we brought was, what about the people in India that they say the world is billions of old? So the rabbi blew him off by saying, first of all, there's nothing scientific there. It's all imaginary worlds. It's all, they have stories, and there's no one to talk to and have an intellectual disagreement with or discussion with. There's just nobody home. Okay, nobody agrees on it. They have no literature. It's complete nonsense. So the king says, okay, I accept that, but what will you answer? And this is where we are now, and this is a deep discussion. What will you answer to the philosophers? And here we're talking about Aristotle, who was the peak of human wisdom and the peak of knowledge and scientific knowledge, and where they measure things and they measure things and they discuss things, and they were serious. They were real thinkers, and therefore we respect them, and therefore we sit down at the table to have a serious intellectual discussion. So what will you answer to I'm just giving you a background. What do you answer to Aristotle, who said not only the world is not billions of years old, the world has no beginning. No beginning. It always was. That's what Aristotle says. So what will you answer to that? Because you're saying that God created the world and he has a mission. And this is very important, this discussion of whether God created the world or the world always existed. Because if God created the world, then he has a mission for the world and he has a purpose for the world. Like you built a house, you had an idea. Why did you want to build it? But if it just always was, so it evolved. And therefore, God has it really comes down to the question, does God want anything from you in the world? Does God care about what you do? Is God interested in your world or in your life or in your actions? And that's the whole story. When the king comes to the philosopher after this dream, and he's startled, and he comes to the philosopher and he says, I had this dream, and God said to me in the dream, your actions are not wanted, but your intentions are wanted. Ma'asecha kavanotecha retzuyot, ma'asecha enam retzuyim. Your intentions are wonderful. I'm so happy you truly want to serve me. But why are you killing these poor animals when you don't even, it's not what I'm asking. I didn't ask you to do it. It's not what I want. Your actions are not wanted. And that's where he starts this whole discussion when he comes to the philosopher and says, I had this dream, and what does it mean? And what is God, like, what's our connection with God? And the philosopher says, whoa. Let me explain you something. God doesn't see you. He doesn't care about you. He's not interested in you. God is beyond. God has nothing to do with this world. It's the same way you stepped on an anthill. You really care about it? Or you're interested? Who cares? It's not even. It's so beyond. It's so beneath you. God is detached. God is the greatest of all greats, and he has no connection with this world whatsoever. He doesn't care. He is not interested, and your dream. He doesn't hear your prayers. He doesn't see you. He doesn't your intentions. I don't want your intentions. Your intentions are great. He doesn't know your intentions. He doesn't see your prayers. He doesn't hear your prayers. He's not interested in you. And that brings the king to he says, I disagree. I feel a strong passion to serve God. And you, the philosopher, are sitting in your ivory tower. You're detached and you say God doesn't care about you, doesn't see you, doesn't hear you. right? And you're in this world just to develop your intellectual knowledge. But I see mankind are passionate in the search for doing the will of God. The Christians, the Muslims, they're willing to kill, they're willing to fast, they're willing to die for the belief of this is the will of God. So you see that there is a very powerful force of people feeling that we are doing the will of God. People want to feel that this is what God wants and He's happy what I'm doing. He sees what I'm doing and He wants me to do this. So how do you answer that? So he kept his search. He kept the search. He reached the Christian. He reached first the Christian. The Christian tells him a story that, like, first he tells him everything that happened to the Jews was all true, and there's no way to prove it wrong. It happened over and over again. It happened in masses who saw it. It repeated itself. It's all true. But then, and this is where the king, you lost me. Then a woman gave birth without a husband, but and the baby wasn't really a person, it was God. And then the king says, whoa, I can't, I'm a rationalist, I'm a person that I think. And you want me to believe that a baby was born without a man. And then the baby was actually God. God is a human. And the Christian says, yes, to be a true Christian, you must sacrifice your common sense for the greater good of belief of God. There's no common sense, doesn't exist. So he goes to the Muslim. And then the Muslim comes along and says, everything that happened to the Jews is all true and it's all real. And then Muhammad came along and everybody is erased and everything before that is gone, worthless and nothing. And all you have is Muhammad. And he wrote this book. That's the most wonderful, like no human could ever write such language with such poetry. And it cannot be human. It's God himself wrote this book. The king says, look, I read the book. It's actually not very impressive. It's a bunch of nonsense. I wasn't so blown away by this book. It's not even like, if it's meant for everybody, it's written in Arabic. So like I'm supposed to connect to like a book in Arabic. Yes, but if you go by Muhammad, you'll get women. And in the next world, you get virgins and food and steak, everything in the next world. So the next world is materialistic world where this is the peak is women and meat, and that's the height of finally you reached your goal, and it's physical pleasures in the next world. And so wait, the Christian's pointing back to the Jews and says everything is true, and then it stopped. The Muslim points back to the Jew and says everything was true and it stopped. I guess that I need to call the Jews in, because even though they must be insignificant because they're scattered around the world, but everyone's pointing back to them. And that's when he comes to the rabbi. And they just start discussion. We're not going to go back to the whole discussion because we want to keep going where we are. And the first question was, so what are you going to answer to the philosophers who say the world always existed? And the king gives a crazy answer. The rabbi gives a crazy answer. Listen, let me explain to you a little history. The rabbi says to the king, let me give you a little lesson in history. When the Greeks, the world is split to three. That's three sons of Noach: Shem, Ham, and Yafet, which corresponds to three types of realities. Shem is holiness. Yefet is beauty, aesthetics. And Ham is what we call Tuma. The world splits to three. Yefet is like, the word Yefet means beauty, Yafeh. Yavan comes from the word in Greek is noi, which is beauty. And they're amazing at art and aesthetics and poetry and plays, and everything has to do with aesthetics. And their strong point is not their brain, not their intellect, not their wisdom. But what happened was, they happened to conquer the world. And they said, wait, we have conquered the world. In order to run the world, you have to have answers to intellectual questions and problems. So They had a one-hit wonder. Aristotle pops out of nowhere. They've never had a big philosopher beforehand. They've never had a big philosopher after. They had a one-hit wonder. They put the gun to his head and said, you need to answer questions on every question that there is. You need to answer the questions. And you need to come up with the answers on your own. Well, where's intellectual integrity? You don't know everything. Where's the around what we call a round table discussion, asking people that come before you or people that may also have some ideas. Everything is based on what was in the past. That's how you invent the next thing. You can't come out of nowhere and give answers to everything. So that's what he says to the answer to the king. And the king says, wait 1 second. I don't like your answer. Because of the historical story that he was a one-hit wonder, and this whole story, what does it have to do with anything? Wisdom is wisdom, and if he gave proof and he gave facts, then what do I care what the historical context is? If he's right, so he's right. The Rambam says, "Kabel et haemet me'ish amira." Accept truth from anyone who says it. Doesn't make a difference, Jew, non-Jew. If they say something that's truth, then accept the truth. You could disagree with it. You can have like an argument, but don't just blow him off without even having a, you're not answering the question that I'm asking. He says, and he brings proofs that the world always existed. Amar Chaver. Okay, so he says, okay, I'll answer you. Now we're in 65. Do you want to read it? In 65, Ananya.
65 or
65.
65. The rabbi answered, yes, it is. Aristotle was forced to exert his mental efforts regarding the universe because he did not have any reliable tradition from his forefathers. He therefore contemplated the origin and end of the universe. It was very difficult for him to fathom a beginning to the universe, while at the same time it was difficult to fathom the theory of an eternal, timeless universe without beginning. But eventually, using reason alone as his guide, he decided to subscribe to the theory of eternal existence. He never saw any reason to ask earlier generations about the age of the universe or how mankind came into existence. Had Aristotle been a part of the nation that inherited the tradition of wisdom about creation, which was so thoroughly accepted and deeply embedded, he would have exerted his efforts towards strengthening belief in creation of the universe, despite the philosophical difficulties, instead of strengthening his theory of eternal existence, which is actually riddled with even greater difficulties.
Thank you. Beautiful. Hananya. So basically what we're saying here, we said that the nation of wisdom is Shem, Ever, and then going down to Avram Avinu, we inherited, this is the nation of the book, the nation of the wisdom, the nation of prophecy, a nation that has the lineage of knowledge that was passed down. So he says, so the king says, the rabbi says, let me bring you into the lab of Aristotle. It wasn't just that he had proof and he knew that this is what it is. He was contemplating. He was in deep, struggle with these two questions that he was contemplating. One was that the world was created, right? As today the theories actually talk about the Big Bang theory, and out of nothing and suddenly it appeared, so which is closer to Judaism. But he was in a struggle whether the world always existed or the world was created from nothing. And he had a certain theory, which is we see everything leads to something else, right? There's no such a thing as something that just doesn't come from something. Everything comes from something. So there must be a reason that brings the next, right? It's a cause and effect. That's the way the world works. Everything leads to something else. So if everything leads to something else, there was always something that led to the next thing, and therefore the world always created. What about what we say? And we say yes, God is the reason for creation. But who's God's reason? God doesn't need a reason. Or we could understand that, but he couldn't bring himself to an understanding that there's something that it's its own reason. Everything has to lead to the next thing. And we understand Hashem is Sibat HaSibot. He's the reason of all reasons. Anyway, but he says, let me explain something. Even if he would have decided to go with the theory that the world was created, he could have used his mind and came up with theories that would back it. In other words, he was debating. And therefore, it wasn't so clear that he had proof. Okay, so read the next line, 66.
The Kuzari asked, but how can the mind entertain an idea of creation if the opposite, eternal existence, has already been proven?
Exactly. So, right, so we're saying, in other words, he's saying that he's saying, no, I know that Aristotle has proof, scientific proof, that makes sense and that's real. And he's saying, I know this. And he's saying, right? He's saying there's no doubts. I don't believe that. He had proof, common sense, that the world always existed. And the rabbi says, I'm sorry, he does not have proof. What he had was a philosophical decision that he made. He decided, I'm going with this. I'm going with the fact that the world always existed. It was not a scientific, it was a philosophical thing. So now read 67.
The rabbi said, when was this issue ever proved? God forbid. The Torah never expects us to believe in things contradicted by evidence or proofs. The Torah does, however, recount miracles, that is, departures from nature, such as new creations or transformation of things, in order to teach about God's wisdom and his ability to act upon his will at a desired time.
Wait, and here. So basically, so he says, so now we're going into a very deep discussion. Because, okay, so there's no argument between science and Torah. There's no argument at all. So now the question is, where do miracles fit into where we could disagree between science are miracles? What are miracles? Are miracles the destruction of nature? Are miracles the destruction of science? How does Judaism, how do you explain miracles? And the answer is, and according to the Rambam, the Maharal, there's different answers. How do you explain miracles? Because we said, so you have Christianity that says everything doesn't make sense, and you could say Judaism, we also have miracles. So we're saying also that nothing makes sense, and that so the answer is, first answer is, miracles do not destroy nature. One answer is, God made agreements when he created nature. It says that God made agreements that the sea splitting, it says when the sea split, Vayashov hayam le'eitano. It says that the sea returned to the way it was before. And what is the words le'eitano? The Gemara says, letna'o, to the agreement. Because God made an agreement with the ocean. When the Jewish people come, you're going to split. So in other words, it's not changing nature. It was already built into nature. So miracles, in other words, it's like you have laws in the city, and then you have what's called laws for the time of emergency. It's not the regular laws, but it doesn't destroy the laws of nature. The laws of nature are important. God wants the world to run with the laws of nature. There's once a story of Rabbi Goren. He was the chief rabbi of the army. And there was a whole unit, the paratroopers, there was not one religious person in the unit. And they said to him, our whole unit decided, we don't want kosher. And there was a law that every unit in the army has to be kosher. And this is when the forming of the state of Israel, and in the beginning, and they said, nobody is religious, and we don't want kosher in our unit. Everybody agreed that everyone signed, they don't want kosher. So the rabbi said, Rav Goren said, well, I'm sorry, there is one religious soldier. I said, what do you mean? We know every soldier. There's not one religious soldier. He says, yeah, there's one. Who's that? Me. I just volunteered to the paratroopers. He says, oh yeah? Then come jump out of a plane. He says, no problem, let's go. They go up to the plane. He's got the parachute. And they say, Rabbi, take off the parachute. He says, why? Rabbi, you believe in God. Jump and hopefully God will save you. And he said, I believe in God. But God, the same God that I believe in, he chose that there should be laws of gravity. And if I go without a parachute, I am defying God. I am going against the will of God, and therefore I deserve to be killed. And so I need a parachute because that's the will of God. It's a true story. Anyway, so he says, what are miracles? So one opinion is miracles were built in when the world was created. They were already decided what was going to be miracles, and therefore it doesn't destroy nature. You don't have to, because you believe in miracles, means you don't believe in nature. You don't believe in the laws of nature. You don't believe in reality. We believe in it. Number two, the second explanation, which I learned this on Rosh Hashanah, and I was like, wow, blown away by also this from the Maharal. He says like this, that when there's a miracle that goes above nature, it never changes the laws of nature. So if you had the miracle where Joshua stopped the sun, where it says Shemesh be'givon dom, he stopped the sun. The regular sun that we know actually kept going and it set. But there was another sun that came and stood and gave light. And we see that in Egypt. In other words, it was actually night, but for us it was day because there was actually another sun. In other words, like we said, there's laws of nature, laws of the city, but then there's laws for time of emergency. So they don't change the regular laws. And therefore in Egypt, they were in the dark, we were in the day because nature continued. So miracles are never destruction of nature. They're just a different reality that we're not aware of, but it doesn't destroy the laws of nature. And here he says here that if there was proof, Judaism would never disagree with facts, with proofs. If he had something, if there was proofs that were really real, right, then we would believe it. But we want you to know that this idea that and he says miracles are the proof that God not only created the world, but that he's still involved in the world, that God is not just created the world, but he knows what's going on, that he's still creating the world, that he's involved. That's what miracles shows, that God, anytime he wants, he can change what he wants. It's the greatest proof of God that created the world because he can also change the creation whenever he wants. And therefore miracles they have an important job. They're not there to destroy nature, but they are there to show that God has the ability to do whatever he wants in the world. And that's why it says that when Amalek heard about the miracle of splitting of the sea, it came to fight us. Why? Because the whole thing of Amalek is the way you're created, your nature, you have to love it, you have to accept it, you have to be by it and never change your nature. But if nature can change, you can change your nature. Maybe you're expected to change your nature, to go above nature. Maybe you're expected to grow and not just accept yourself, this is how I am. So therefore I have to fight this nation that says there's miracles, that says nature can change. If you can change nature, then you're obligated to change your nature. But I'm an angry person, accept me. No, you're an angry person. Nature can change, you can change also. It's hard work, it's difficult, it's why you're in this world. Yes.
I was just curious, is it that there's no suspension of nature? It's more that it's built into the system. So then how do we change?
One opinion is that it's built into the system. Mm-hmm. It's built into the system. In other words, it was built in when God created the world. Every miracle that's going to happen was already built into nature. So it's a law of nature. It's exactly like a law. The sea split. It's part of the laws of nature that the sun goes around in 24 hours and spins and everything. So there's nothing changed. God never destroyed any nature. He's not defying gravity because it was built in as the laws of nature. So miracles, the Maharal says, are part of it's a seder, it's part of the order of the world. And there's nothing here that is destroying the laws of nature and the reality that we know. Okay?
But there was another opinion saying that it was a change of nature?
Another opinion says no, that nature continued, but there was another reality that coexisted at the same time. So in other words, the sun was set as usual. But for us, the Jewish people who were fighting, the sun stood. So at the same time, the laws of nature kept going, and at the same time, the sun stood there, and we had light, and for us, it was the day. The same way the Egyptians, they were in the dark, and for us, it was regular time. The same thing with the water. They were drinking blood, we were drinking water. So the two realities existed at the same time. In other words, it was always there, but you didn't see it.
An overlap.
Overlap. So that's the interesting ideas. Um, so therefore, he says the Torah, and therefore, so miracles have a place, but they are not the destruction of nature and common sense and reality. And it's very important. And when you're a doctor or you're a physicist or whatever you're doing, so you have to act like there's no miracles. You have to like this only the reality. You have to rely on the reality that we know, which is whatever we have, right? Yes.
Is it possible? Well, these two realities are bonding together. Is it possible that we can, like, a Jewish people can get into another reality to experience another
For
reality?
sure, for sure. That's the we said Moshe Rabbeinu is an example, is the example of who we are. He's one person who reached the potential of a Jew, and he went completely above nature. He didn't eat or drink for 40 days. He didn't. He knew the past and the future. He knew all these things. His face was beaming without eating. Usually, you don't eat. You're weak. His face was so full of light. He's another reality. We 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 have the ability to tap into that place. Prophecy. That is ultimately what we're getting back to, and that's the big question. The Jewish people are built to be prophets. The fact that we're not prophets is a problem. But yes, we are above nature as the Jewish nation, because we said the Jewish nation, according to reality, should not exist. All the empires in the world have been trying to destroy us, and we're still here. So therefore, and every nation we know is every nation like a human being, right? It says Netzach Israel, lo yinachem v'lo yishaker ki lo adam hu linachem. The Shmuel tells you, Shaul, the eternity of the Jewish people will be forever because they're not a person. A person, like a person is born and he lives 120 years and he dies, and and that's just the reality. The Jewish people, on the other hand, they are born and they never die. 3,000 years we're around, and we'll be around many, many thousands of years ahead, and therefore that just tells us about, and that's who we are. Do we tap into that place? I think we tap into that place with all especially during war, and you see this courage and these bravery and these miracles that are happening. That's us tapping into this place that is like the lion wakes up, like we suddenly become above nature. But as a nation, just who we are, just how we exist. Remember, we mentioned the king that brings the gifts that makes you live forever, and we have these weapons that destroys our enemies without even fighting. That's us. That's who we are, and we are above nature. There's no other way to explain it. So, therefore, I'm going to end this piece here. I have 5 more minutes. Sorry, I had to end 10 minutes early. And the two questions, whether the world always existed or the world, was always existed or the world was created. This is a very deep question. V'rayot shte hatanot ken shavot. And if you had to place the two proofs and facts, whether the world always existed or the world was created, if you had to place both theories on the scale of the intellect, you would have equal proofs to both sides. And like I said, Aristotle could have brought proofs to show that the world was created. He could have, if he decided that was the truth, he could have also brought proofs for that. But he went on the path that the world was always existed. But the fact is, the only way to know if the world was created was הקבלה מאדם ועד נוח ומשה ונבואה אשר היא מאין ספק יותר מנה מההיקש. The only way to know that the world was created or always existed was prophecy. And we received the prophecy. How could you know? You weren't there in the beginning. How could you know? The only way to know whether, with facts, the world was created or the world always existed is you'd have to be there, right? But therefore, so he's saying here, basically what the rabbi is saying is the question whether the world was created or the world always existed is not a scientific question. It's a question of prophecy. And by Aristotle trying to answer these questions and saying the world always existed, he was going into dealing with a reality that does not apply to him, that's not in his realm of wisdom. Okay? And therefore, But this one more thing I want to end with, because then we go back, then he ends this part, and then he goes back to the big question of God really communicates with human beings? God communicates with people that because that big question that like the philosopher said, God has no connection with people. He doesn't communicate with them. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't see you. He doesn't anything. And he goes back to that question. But here he says that it's not a question for philosophy. It's a question for prophecy, and we have it handed down from Adam, Arishon, and Noach and Moshe with prophecy, and therefore, and then the rabbi comes a little towards the philosopher, and he says, you know what? But if you want the only theory that I could come towards you, you want to say the world always existed? Fine. ואם היה מצטרך בעל התורה להאמין להודות בחומר ביולי החומר הקדמון עולמות רבים עולמות הזה לא היה פגם באמונתו. You want to believe the world always existed? No problem. כי הוא מאמין כי העולם הזה הוא חדש מזמן ידוע ותחילת האדם אשר בו אדם וחווה. You know what? You want to believe your theory the world always existed? I'll even come towards you. Let's say the world always existed, but the reality, the world that we're in, was God formed it. God created it. So the world, there was always material, and by the way, this is what his Rabbi of Aristotle's Rabbi, whose name was Plato, and he was much greater. He said that the world always existed, but the reality that we're in, happened at a certain time. So in other words, God took the reality, but they're so materialistic that they can't ever understand that there could be something that created the world. So there had to always be material, because if there's no material, what am I supposed to measure? What am I supposed to in science? You're only explaining things. You're only explaining how things work. You're not explaining why they are that way. Why do you put your hand to fire, you burn? I don't know, but it burns. I could explain the laws of gravity. I could explain, but I can't explain why. I can explain how. But if there's no material, I can't explain anything. So they can't bring their minds to think that there was no reality. I just want to end with one thing, very important to know. We say the world is Adam Arishon. The first Adam was born 5,785 years ago. And then the rest of the world is 6 days before that. Right? 6 days, it says in the Torah, God created the world. So there's questions. What do you mean the world is created 6 days? How do you measure days when you don't have a sun and the moon? It was only sun and the moon were only created on the 4th day. So how do you even measure a day? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday was when the sun and the moon. So how are you measuring 6 days? So why do we say the world is 5,785 years plus 6 days? Yes.
You could make the claim, right, that the days in the Torah are not a measure of time, right?
Beautiful. But what I want to say here is something different from my rabbi, Rav Zuckerman. He's saying, why do we say the world is only 5,785 years plus 6 days? The answer is to understand, to explain to you that the only existence to human beings is the tzaddik that lives in the world. That the world was created for Adam Arishon, a holy person, a moral person, had freedom of choice, that was communicating with God. It's like, I'm not going to measure you according to your clothes. How old is your clothes? I measure you when you were born, because that's what's important. So whether the world was billions of years, that's not what we want to teach you. The rabbi is trying to teach the king a new idea. The world is measured by the morality in it, by the moral people that lives by connection to God and closest to God. That is what makes the world have a right to exist. That's the purpose of the world. God created the whole world to serve man that's serving God, and that's what's important to us. And therefore we will connect the 6 days to the creation of Adam Arishon. Not because maybe material was billions of years old. You may be right. But that's not that we want to teach you something new. Look at the world in eyes of morality. Like we said, unfortunately, in the world, they don't do this. And therefore, the scientists gave over to the world the secret of the nuclear bomb and began a race between the Germans to the Americans. Who's going to be first to do it? Thank God the Americans were better than the Germans. But if you give wisdom and you don't connect it to morality, who cares? There should be a test. Anyone who goes to university, a moral test. Can we give you wisdom? You don't give wisdom to a wicked person, because they'll use it for bad. And that's the message to try to teach, that the world was created to serve man who's serving God. So thank you, everybody, and we'll continue next week about the big question of could it be that God communicates with human beings.